In the last week of December 1944, in the snow-choked forests of the Belgian Ardennes, a group of German officers sat down with maps spread across a farmhouse table and tried to explain something that, by every rule of their own doctrine, should not have happened. A single American division, cut off, outnumbered, and short on ammunition, had refused to fall. The road junction they had been ordered to seize within 48 hours was still, after more than a week, in American hands. For the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS alike, Bastogne had stopped being a problem of geography and had become a problem of explanation. To understand why that explanation mattered so much, it is necessary to return to the state of the German war machine in the autumn of 1944. By September, the armies that had once swept across Poland, France, and the Soviet Union were in retreat on every front. The Western Allies had broken out of Normandy in August, liberated Paris, and were advancing toward the German border faster than their own supply lines could support. In the east, the Red Army had shattered Army Group Center and was pushing into East Prussia and the Balkans. Germany's fuel reserves were collapsing under the weight of Allied strategic bombing of synthetic oil plants, and its officer corps understood, even if they could not say so aloud, that the war was being lost on two fronts at once. Adolf Hitler's answer to this collapse was audacious and, in the judgment of many of his own generals, reckless. He proposed a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest, the same wooded, hilly terrain the German army had used to outflank the French in 1940. The plan, codenamed Wacht am Rhein and later referred to by German planners as Herbstnebel, called for three armies: the 6th Panzer Army under SS Oberstgruppenführer Sepp Dietrich, the 5th Panzer Army under General Hasso von Manteuffel, and the 7th Army under General Erich Brandenberger, to punch through the thinly held American lines in Belgium and Luxembourg, cross the Meuse River, and drive on to the port of Antwerp. If Antwerp could be recaptured, Hitler reasoned, the British and American armies in the north would be split from those in the south, denied their principal supply port, and forced into a negotiated peace that would allow Germany to concentrate everything against the Soviets in the east. It was on paper a plan built for a German army of 1940, not one for the depleted, fuel-starved force of December 1944. And at the very center of the planned route to the Meuse sat the small Belgian town of Bastogne. Bastogne was not strategically significant because of its size. It had, by the count used in most military histories, 7 main hard-surfaced roads converging on it, along with a rail line and a network of secondary roads threading through the surrounding hills. For an army that depended on wheeled and tracked vehicles to move fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements, a road hub of that density was not optional terrain. It was terrain that had to be controlled if any large mechanized force intended to keep moving west. General Heinrich von Leutwitz, commanding the XLVII Panzer Corps, was given explicit orders. The Panzer Lehr Division, one of the Wehrmacht's most experienced armored formations under Lieutenant General Fritz Bayerlein, was to approach Bastogne from the south and seize the undefended town before December 18. Alongside Panzer Lehr, the 2nd Panzer Division and the 26th Volksgrenadier Division under Major General Heinz Kakat were assigned to encircle and take the town, as part of the Corps' broader drive toward the Meuse. When the German offensive opened in the pre-dawn hours of December 16, 1944, it caught the American command almost completely by surprise. Thin, overextended American divisions, some resting after earlier campaigns, others green and newly arrived in Europe, held an 80-mile front through terrain that Allied intelligence had judged unsuitable for a major armored offensive. The 28th Infantry Division and elements of the 106th Infantry Division bore the initial shock along what became known as the Skyline Drive, and although both formations suffered heavy losses, their delaying actions bought something the German planners had not accounted for: time. Every hour that American units held a crossroads, blew a bridge, or simply refused to move without orders slowed the German timetable, and the entire German plan depended on speed. That delay allowed the Allied High Command to react. General Dwight D. Eisenhower and his staff, recognizing within a day that this was not a local spoiling attack but a major offensive, ordered reinforcements toward the Ardennes. Among the units rushed north was the 101st Airborne Division, then resting and refitting at Camp Mermelin in France after the costly Operation Market Garden campaign in Holland. The division was under strength, its men still recovering from the fighting around Arnhem, and its senior commander, Major General Maxwell Taylor, was in the United States on official business. Command of the division for the coming battle fell to the acting commander, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, the division's artillery commander. On December 18 and 19, the 101st Airborne moved more than 100 miles from Mermelin to Bastogne in open trucks, in freezing temperatures, arriving in some cases mere hours ahead of the advancing German columns. Alongside them stood Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division under Colonel William Roberts, along with combat engineers, tank destroyer units, and field artillery battalions from VII Corps. It was this combination of forces, airborne infantry, armor, engineers, and artillery, that would form the perimeter around Bastogne in the days that followed, and it was Roberts himself who later observed that the 101st alone could not have held the town, nor could the armor alone, but that together their combined strength was multiplied several times over. Before the encirclement closed completely, the fight for time continued along the approaches to the town. Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division, arriving ahead of the main German thrust, fought delaying actions east of Bastogne that cost the Germans further hours they could not spare. In one of these actions, at the crossroads village of Novel, a scratch American force built around a battalion of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, and Combat Command B's tanks held against elements of the 2nd Panzer Division through most of December 19 and 20, absorbing losses but denying the Germans free use of the northern approach into Bastogne. It was this pattern, small American units trading ground grudgingly, and only when ordered rather than collapsing outright, that repeated itself across the entire perimeter in the days that followed. And it was this pattern that German planners, working from intelligence estimates that treated Bastogne as a lightly defended objective, had not built into their timetable. By December 20, the German advance had encircled Bastogne. Panzer Lehr, the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, and the 2nd Panzer Division pressed in from multiple directions, probing the American perimeter for a weak point. What followed over the next several days was a series of German attacks that, on the map, should have overwhelmed a lightly equipped airborne division holding a hastily improvised line. They did not succeed. American artillery, concentrated inside the perimeter and able to mass fire on any threatened sector, because the defenders held interior lines, broke up German assaults before they could gain momentum. The Germans, by contrast, could not coordinate simultaneous attacks from multiple directions, in part because of the terrain and in part because of fuel shortages that limited the mobility of their armor. Each attack came in piecemeal, and each was answered by artillery fire that inflicted disproportionate losses on the attacking infantry and armor alike. The defensive scheme itself was, in engineering and tactical terms, straightforward, but demanding to execute under siege conditions. Rather than attempting to hold a continuous, evenly manned line around the entire perimeter, roughly 16 miles in circumference, McAuliffe's staff organized the defense around a series of mutually supporting strongpoints centered on the villages ringing the town. Novel, Foy, Recogny, Champs, Marvy, and others, with the bulk of the available artillery held centrally and directed by a fire control system capable of shifting the weight of every battalion's guns onto any single threatened sector within minutes. This concentration was possible only because the perimeter, however thinly held, gave the defenders interior lines. A threatened company at Champs could be reinforced or supported by fire far more quickly than the German units attacking it could be reinforced from outside the ring. Ammunition remained a persistent and serious problem, worsened by the fact that resupply by air was impossible until the weather cleared on December 23, but the artillery's ability to mass fire, even with rationed shells, repeatedly broke up German infantry and armor concentrations before they could exploit a breakthrough. On December 21 and 22, Panzer Lehr and the 26th Volksgrenadier Division launched a series of probing attacks against the western and southwestern edges of the perimeter, testing positions held by the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment near Marvy and other units along the Neufchâteau Road. These attacks gained limited ground but were contained, at a cost in German infantry and armor that Kockott himself later described, in his conferences with Marshall, as heavier than the division could readily sustain given the overall weakness of its infantry strength after weeks of continuous campaigning. It was in the midst of this fighting, with the ring around Bastogne fully closed and the first serious attacks already repulsed, that Leutwitz's corps sent forward the surrender ultimatum on December 22, a decision that, as von Manteufel's post-war account makes clear, had not been coordinated up the German chain of command and appears to have reflected a hope, rather than a calculated assessment, that a surrounded and outnumbered garrison might simply capitulate rather than face annihilation by artillery. On December 22, 4 German soldiers, a major, a captain, and 2 enlisted men, approached the American lines near the Kessler farm under a white flag. They carried a written ultimatum addressed to the American commander of the encircled town, offering in formal and somewhat elaborate language an honorable surrender within 2 hours, with the warning that refusal would bring the full weight of German artillery and anti-aircraft units to bear on the defenders. Private First Class Ernest Permetz of the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment escorted the German officers to the American command post, where the message was delivered to McAuliffe. His first reaction, by multiple first-hand accounts, was a dismissive exclamation of disbelief. When his staff asked what formal reply should be sent back, McAuliffe settled on a single word, typed and delivered under flag of truce back to the German lines: nuts. When the German officers receiving the reply failed to understand the American slang, an American officer translated it for them in blunter terms, telling them it meant, in essence, to go to hell. The demand had come from General Heinrich von Leutwitz's corps, and it produced, according to post-war interrogations of German commanders, a moment of real confusion on the German side. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the 5th Panzer Army, later told Allied interrogators that he had not authorized the ultimatum at all, and that he was uncertain who within Panzer Lehr Division had taken the initiative to send it. He noted plainly that its rejection had come as no surprise to him. Major General Kakot, whose 26th Volksgrenadier Division was among the units most directly engaged in the siege, offered his own account of the confusion during a series of post-war conferences with the American historian S.L.A. Marshall, describing the tangled sequence of orders and troop movements around Foy and the western approaches to Bastogne in the days surrounding the ultimatum. These conferences, held in the winter of 1945 and 1946 between Marshall and the 3 principal German commanders directly responsible for the attack on Bastogne, Leutwitz, Bayerlein, and Kakot, produced one of the most detailed first-hand German accounts of any single engagement in the European campaign, and they make clear that even the commanders directing the assault on the town were struggling to understand why it had not fallen. It is important, in the interest of historical accuracy, to be precise about which German forces were actually engaged in this initial fight for Bastogne. The units that surrounded and repeatedly attacked the town between December 20 and December 26 were Wehrmacht formations, not Waffen-SS, Panzer Lehr, the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, and the 2nd Panzer Division, all under Leutwitz's XLVII Panzer Corps. The Waffen-SS divisions of the offensive, the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, and the 9th SS Panzer Division Hohenstaufen, were initially committed farther north, spearheading the 6th Panzer Army's drive toward the Elsenborn Ridge, and in the case of the 1st SS Panzer Division's Kampfgruppe under Joachim Paper, driving west through Stavelot, Staumont, and La Gleize. That northern effort and the resistance it met from the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions on the Elsenborn Ridge has its own well-documented history, but it was fought largely apart from the siege of Bastogne itself. The direct collision between Waffen-SS units and the defenders of the Bastogne corridor came later, and it came because the 6th Panzer Army's drive in the north had stalled. Blocked at Elsenborn Ridge and slowed by fuel shortages and Allied resistance elsewhere, the German High Command shifted the weight of the entire offensive toward Bastogne in the final days of December. On December 26, spearheads of the American 4th Armored Division, part of General George Patton's 3rd Army, which had wheeled north from positions far to the south in a movement executed with remarkable speed, broke through the German ring and opened a narrow corridor into the town. The siege in the strict sense was over, but the battle for Bastogne was not, because the corridor Patton's forces had opened was narrow, exposed, and immediately became the focus of a renewed German effort to sever it and re-isolate the town. It was this second phase of the fighting, the battle for the corridor rather than the siege of the town itself, that finally brought Waffen-SS formations into direct contact with the defenders who had held Bastogne. The 1st SS Panzer Division, badly attrited from its earlier fighting in the north and delayed by fuel shortages, was transferred to the XXXIX Panzer Corps under General Karl Decker on December 28 as part of a newly formed command grouping tasked with eliminating the Bastogne salient once and for all. Its objective was the road running south from Bastogne toward Martelange, the same corridor that Patton's forces were using to reinforce and resupply the town. On the night of December 29, the division moved south through the hilly, forested terrain of the Duchy of Luxembourg toward Tarchemps and Luttremange, from which it was to launch its attack, supported on its northern flank by the 167th Volksgrenadier Division and elements of the Panzer Lehr Division. The attack came on December 30, striking American positions held by the 35th Infantry Division near the villages of Lutrebois and Villers-Labonneau, close to the southern edge of the Bastogne perimeter, where 101st Airborne units and other American forces defending the corridor were also engaged. Tanks of the 1st SS Panzer Division overran the small American garrison at Villers-Labonneau. Only a single soldier made it back to American lines, and the rest of the defenders there were killed or captured. At Lutrebois, a confused and bitter engagement developed in the snow and forest, with American infantry, tank destroyers, and artillery inflicting severe losses on the attacking SS armor even as ground was lost and retaken repeatedly through the day. This is the fighting in which men who wore the SS runes on their collars, veterans of Kharkov, Normandy, and the earlier drive on Elsenborn, found themselves for the first time directly matched against the same American formations that had refused to yield the town for more than a week. The fighting did not end there. On December 31, with the corridor still contested and the German High Command unwilling to abandon the effort to cut it, additional units were committed, including the 12th SS Panzer Division under Brigadier General Hugo Kras, part of ISS Panzer Corps, along with the 340th Volksgrenadier Division. Later, in the first days of January 1945, the 9th SS Panzer Division was also drawn into the effort to close the salient. None of these attacks succeeded in severing the corridor permanently. American artillery, now reinforced and firing from secure positions inside a widening perimeter, along with Allied air support that returned in force once the weather cleared on December 24, inflicted losses on the attacking German armor that the depleted panzer divisions could not sustain. In one representative engagement south of the corridor in this period, American infantry bazooka teams accounted for 21 destroyed German armored fighting vehicles in a single day's fighting, with a further 27 knocked out by anti-tank guns and mines, a rate of loss that badly damaged the combat effectiveness of the 12th SS Panzer Division and forced ISS Panzer Corps to revise its plans for the sector. Command of the overall German effort against Bastogne shifted repeatedly in these final days of December, a sign in itself of how badly the original operational plan had broken down. Lieutenant General Karl Decker's XXXIX Panzer Corps assumed responsibility for coordinating the renewed assault on the corridor, and a new unified command grouping, informally known to the troops as Army Group Leutwitz, was created to bring the XXXIX and XLVII Panzer Corps under a single coordinating headquarters tasked with eliminating the Bastogne salient once and for all. Field Marshal von Rundstedt understood the stakes clearly. If the Germans could not destroy the American forces holding the corridor, they would be drawn into precisely the kind of static, grinding battle of attrition the entire Ardennes offensive had been designed from the outset to avoid. Preparations went forward for a renewed major attack on January 1, 1945, even as American reinforcements, growing artillery strength, and the return of Allied air power steadily eroded the German position east of Bastogne to the point where the planned attack had to be reworked entirely before it was launched. What German officers, both Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS, recorded in their own post-war accounts and in wartime after-action reports was not a story of American amateurism overcome by professional German soldiering, which is what the original operational plan had assumed would happen against what German intelligence believed to be a lightly held, poorly defended crossroads town. It was closer to the opposite. Kakot's own post-war account, given directly to SLA Marshall, described a defense that adapted, concentrated its limited artillery with unusual efficiency, and refused to break even when individual positions were overrun. Von Manteufel's account of the surrender ultimatum reflects an awareness, even among senior German commanders, that the demand had been sent more in hope than in real expectation that a determined American garrison would comply. And the record of the fighting itself, division after division committed and thrown back at a cost the German army in the West could no longer easily absorb, speaks for itself in the casualty and equipment loss figures compiled by both sides after the battle. The scale of what the German High Command committed to breaking Bastogne grew steadily as the days passed. What began as a 3-division task for Leutwitz's corps, meant to be completed within 48 hours, eventually drew in troops from at least 8 German divisions across the course of the siege and the subsequent fight for the corridor, including Volksgrenadier, Panzergrenadier, and Waffen-SS formations, along with parachute infantry and the Führer Escort Brigade. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, the German commander-in-chief in the West, understood by late December that continuing to feed divisions into the fight for Bastogne without breaking the American position risked exactly the kind of grinding battle of attrition the original offensive had been designed to avoid. Hitler, however, refused to authorize any withdrawal or change in objective, and the fighting around Bastogne continued into January, even as the broader German offensive toward the Meuse had already failed. The wider cost of this decision extended far beyond the Ardennes. Every panzer division tied down in the frozen fields around Bastogne through late December and into January was a division unavailable to reinforce the Eastern Front, where the Soviet Vistula-Oder offensive opened in mid-January 1945 against a German defense that had already been stripped of much of its remaining armored reserve. Formations such as the 1st SS Panzer Division, 12th SS Panzer Division, and 9th SS Panzer Division, badly worn down in the fighting around Bastogne, were among those later transferred east into Hungary for the German Army's last major armored offensive of the war, Operation Frühlingserwachen, in March 1945, an operation that failed within days and effectively ended German offensive capability for the remainder of the conflict. In that sense, the losses absorbed by the Waffen-SS Panzer divisions in the fields south of Bastogne in late December 1944 were not a localized setback. They were part of the broader collapse of Germany's mobile reserve in the last winter of the war. For the American side, the defense of Bastogne became, almost immediately, one of the defining episodes of the United States Army's campaign in Europe. The 101st Airborne Division, which had entered the battle under strength and short of winter clothing, ammunition, and medical supplies, earned the informal title later popularized in press accounts and veteran memoirs as the Battered Bastards of Bastogne, a name that captured both the punishment the division absorbed and its refusal to yield ground. McAuliffe's one-word reply to the German surrender ultimatum became, within days, front-page news across the United States, reported first without his name attached and then, once his identity was confirmed, celebrated in newspapers from coast to coast as one of the defining moments of American resolve in the war. The 101st Airborne Division as a whole, along with the attached armor, artillery, and engineer units that fought alongside it, received a Distinguished Unit Citation, at the time an extremely rare honor for an entire division, in recognition of the defense. In the decades that followed, the story of Bastogne was documented and redocumented from every available angle. SLA Marshall's early post-war interviews with Leutwitz, Bayerlein, and Kakat remain a foundational primary source precisely because they capture, in the words of the German commanders themselves, how the battle looked from the other side of the perimeter. Later historians drew on German divisional records, American after-action reports, and the personal accounts of surviving veterans on both sides to reconstruct the fighting in increasing detail, including the often overlooked second phase of the battle, in which Waffen-SS Panzer divisions were drawn into the fight for the corridor south of the town. Today, the town of Bastogne itself preserves this history directly, through the Bastogne War Museum, the Mardassen Memorial commemorating American soldiers who died in the battle, and an annual commemoration each December that draws veterans' descendants, historians, and the general public to the same crossroads that German planners once assumed would fall within 2 days. The battle also left a lasting institutional legacy within the United States Army itself. The 101st Airborne Division continues to serve today, its history at Bastogne remaining a central part of its unit identity and training tradition, invoked in official histories and passed down to new generations of soldiers who serve in the same division. The broader lesson drawn from the battle by military historians, that a well-coordinated defense combining infantry, armor, engineers, and concentrated artillery on interior lines could hold against a numerically and materially superior attacking force, has been studied at military academies and staff colleges in the years since as a case study in the value of combined arms defense under siege conditions. Return then to that farmhouse table in the last days of December 1944, where German commanders, some of them Wehrmacht officers who had led the initial siege, others Waffen-SS officers whose panzer divisions were thrown into the fight for the corridor only after the town itself had already held out for more than a week, tried to account for what had gone wrong. The honest answer, documented afterward in their own words to interrogators and historians, was not a single tactical error or a single missed opportunity. It was that an outnumbered, undersupplied American division, reinforced by armor, artillery, and engineers operating on interior lines, had done exactly what German planning had assumed it could not do. It had held. The road junction that Wacht am Rhein required within 48 hours remained in American hands for the duration of the battle, and every division Germany committed to changing that outcome, Wehrmacht or Waffen-SS, was fed into a fight it could not win and could not afford to keep fighting. What the officers who faced the defenders of Bastogne said afterward, in interrogation rooms and post-war interviews rather than in wartime propaganda, was in its own way a tribute to the men who had refused to move. An acknowledgement, however reluctant, that the town they had been ordered to take in 2 days had instead cost them 6 weeks, thousands of casualties, and a share of the armored reserve Germany could never replace.